Welcome to the Ohio Lodge of Research and another episode of OLR Connections. In episode 37, Brother Chad Kopenski and Brother Jason Richards of the Masonic Round Table Podcast discussed that often asked question, is Masonry a business? Which leads them down a path searching to explain the value of Freemasonry.
I have a very large and long text conversation happening right now with a number of my friends, and it's gotten weirdly philosophical. I'll just say that. Because at this point, we were boiling this down to, okay, what is Masonry's product? Okay. And then we're saying, well,
But Chad,
okay,
Masonry is not a business.
sure it is, isn't it?
Should be treated as one.
There's like two factions right now in this conversation. One is saying it's a business, and if it's a business, then there is a profit margin there. So what is Masonry's profit? So if we have the individual lodge and they have a product, and right now what we're going with is that we still haven't figured out what exactly Masonry's product is. I have my idea. I'm sure you have yours.
Better
See,
men.
I took it a little bit differently. I said that it is good men, but if I don't say meaningful connections, then somebody will explode. I said it was good men with meaningful connections and opportunities to use both those connections and their values out in the regular world. So
okay.
You said it much nicer than I did.
Mine was more reductive. So okay, I think I think you can argue that those other things are implicit assumptions.
Yeah.
Within under the framework of good/better men, but it's helpful to call those out to give that statement kind of objectivity, right?
Right.
It makes it less subjective. And so, if the product is better men, how do you know the product's good? It's not just a numbers game. It shouldn't be a numbers game. What are the expected outputs of a quote unquote better man?
Well, and what's that process, and how do you measure that? So if that's our product, right? Again, then now the argument is, well, what's the profit, and how do you measure that? And we're going back and forth, because what does that look like? What does that mean if Freemasonry is a business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And right now we are kind of in a McDonald's like franchise model, right? There's the corporate office.
It's an insolvent franchise model.
Explain. What do you mean?
Freemasonry is losing product more than it is gaining and obtaining product. And so, yes, it's a McDonald's franchise. But if we look specifically at the numbers of brethren who go non-payment of dues or NPD, that if we're looking at things, and I hate bringing things back to numbers, because I do not think that is how we demonstrate value or track value.
Right.
But if we look at, betterness as a whole and becoming good citizens and better citizens through reasoned and learned discourse and things like that, we have a couple things at play where, yes, Masonry is a franchised model. Masonry means different things to different people. Being a good man and a better man means a lot of different things. Freemasonry is a microcosm of the political climate in which the lodge sits, and so you may have you know, being a better man in DC may be different than being a better man according to the Grand Lodge of Texas. And I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, but
it means that all Freemasonry is local. But that if all Freemasonry is local, then the argument is, what's the role of Grand Lodge? Because of Grand Lodge, at least for the last, 30 or 40 years in many jurisdictions, is that kind of McDonald's top-down, directive sort of thing, which doesn't
it's a
necessarily work.
standardizing function, right?
Right.
It ultimately controls the chaos, and you get Grand Lodges that leave the reins kind of wide open, like the Grand Lodge of Scotland. You have a bunch of different rituals, a bunch of different lodges working according to how they've been working for 200 years.
Right.
And then you have Grand Lodges that constrain the reins, and it makes it so that, at the individual lodge level, you don't quite have as much freedom to move within Masonry within that construct.
I know. And it's something that I've struggled with a boatload.
What's the right tension to have on the reins to standardize so that you can, because when you look at franchises, right, what are franchise owners trying to do? They are trying to enforce the brand,
right,
standardize the offering so that
right,
customers experience a similar type of experience wherever they go.
Right. Collectively, they benefit from each other, the brand. Like,
yeah.
I know that if I've got a great experience at McDonald's in here, I can go to this McDonald's and have a comparable experience. Right.
It's not going to be exactly the same, but there are certain standards. Yeah.
Right. Taco Bell, right? They have different sauces for different parts of the country based off of those particular tastes. It's wonderful. But when it comes to Masonry, it's like you're saying, a successful lodge in Athens, Ohio is different than a successful lodge in Zanesville. The tension is, right, how do you measure that? And from a Grand Lodge perspective, how do you quantify that? And how do you report and you measure that? Because then becomes the idea of leadership. If leadership changes every single year, that means the metrics or the values or the whatever potentially changes from year to year. And one of the things that you all said last night that I thought was really interesting, I forget who said it. It was talking about separating out essentially the business and the culture of a lodge. That almost for the mothership to make money and for the administrative and financial needs of the company, there should be a CEO, right, who is handling the business affairs, who is tending to the administrative needs of the lodge. But then there was also, in this model, the Grand Master sets these almost like cultural priorities. This year, we're going to focus on this. We're going to have these events. We're going to do whatever. And Michigan has that model, and a couple places have that model.
Look, that's really hard to do. And I'm not being pedantic. Mm-hmm. Arguably, Masonry has struggled with empirically measuring and demonstrating value since 1922, because Masonry has been in decline, not since 1959, but since 1922. And so, that is, again, that's the numbers, right? The numbers have been in decline, but you can argue that numbers can be a kind of a check engine light to the value that is assessed on the organization externally. right? Like if other people outside of the organization assess, Freemasonry as having tremendous value, then we will have more people coming in. We will not have to keep lowering that bar to get in and keep, going out and Masons don't recruit, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but going out and selling Masonry.
So,
And so we have a problem with empirically measuring and demonstrating value.
then the question is whether that's the right way to look at Masonry. Should we look at Masonry as a business model, or should we think about it more like a school, right? Schools on paper, right? A public school doesn't really generate money. Like it's a resource suck.
It generates value.
It generates value. It doesn't generate capital, doesn't generate, right? But having a good school in your neighborhood producing well-educated people, tons of value. It just isn't necessarily quantifiable and immediately measurable. Like you don't see the fruits of your labor in 6 months. You see it at different times in different places. Why are we looking at Masonry as a business when it's not a business? It's a school. So let's look at it from the perspective of how we might judge a school.
So I'm with you. However, I would argue that there's when you reduce it down, there is little that differentiates a school from a business except in the way you assess and track and measure value.
Okay.
So now, do I think that Masonry should be a for-profit? No. I think that is a terrible idea. Do I think that Masonry really should be focused on, being a nonprofit and doing what it can to enrich, its local lodges and the Masonic experience? Yes. So when I say Masonry is a business, everybody goes and veers toward, well, that means we're looking at fiscal and monetary profit. And that is not the case with Freemasonry. However, when you boil it down, you're still having to track value and you're still having to put the same things in place, whether it's a school, a business, a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. You still have to understand your value proposition. You have to understand what you provide and whether or not there's a market for it. And if there isn't a market for it, how you can change to be relevant or add new value in a way that resonates external to the organization.
So why can't Masonry figure that out right now? Why are they struggling with that?
I think, well, one, it's hard. It is, I do a lot with product management and emerging technology. And, how do you ascribe value to using technology to help make somebody's life easier or help them do things better? Like, how do you measure that?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to empirically track and measure. And so I think it's a similar thing with Masonry, where the value we provide is inherently subjective. And the assessment of that value, comes externally.
Yes.
And so
Interesting. Yes, because even though if my lodge is, if we have a phenomenal lodge doing phenomenal ritual with great guys who all started, on the wrong side of the tracks and now are paragons of virtue, it doesn't matter unless somehow outside of the walls of the lodge, they know our story, or they know what we've done, or they know about us, right?
Right. It's I think it's, is it the Quakers or the Shakers? I think it's the Shakers. They are a religious denomination,
Mm-hmm.
and they just actively, they keep to themselves, and
Yeah.
they don't proselytize, and so their numbers, they keep dwindling and dwindling and dwindling because there's nothing like external happening.
It's just interesting what you're saying, because I guess we don't talk about that idea of external validation with the lodges. We talk about, when I was in the membership committee in Ohio, we said, like, lodge, you need to work towards being visible and necessary in your community. That was our catchphrase.
Sure.
And I don't know that we necessarily gave it that. I don't know that we necessarily made lodges understand why that's important. It isn't just about getting members. It's about that perceived value. Even if Peg across the street can't become a Mason, she perceives that there's a value having Masonic Lodge in her town and having Masons around her. And that's the benefit. So we are visible, necessary in our communities, not to gain members, but to
it's a natural outcropping of being better men. Right. Like, Masonry, I argue, Masonry isn't a charitable organization.
agree.
And it shouldn't be the aim of Masonry. What it should be, and I understand I'm delving into like utopianism here, but what Masonry should do is create and develop that cadre of men who act charitably.
Right.
And that should be a measuring mechanism on how well Masonry is doing.
They aren't internal and isolated, but they are also externally focused and connected.
They can be, they can be as internal as they want to be in Masonry, but no man is an island, and so no man is just Masonic. And so Masonry should spill out into other parts of life, whatever that is different for the individual Mason. And so when we talk externally, it's very much like microcosmic and a very granular level to the individual Mason.
There's a educational program that on the Grand Lodge of Ohio called Living Masonically Outside of Lodge. It always seemed strange to me at the time that we actually had to have a document that said that Masonry is not bound by the four walls of the lodge and the opening and closing times of the meeting, and that we had to have a document that said, your actions have constant, you may be what somebody thinks of as a Mason. So your actions are always being observed. You never know who's watching, and what effect that may be. And so whereas we can talk about, whatever, external ways to get educated or external ways of connecting, just recognizing that Masonry is more than the lodge meeting, the lodge building, and that dedicated time. So yeah, it seems silly to me that we had to have a document that said that, because that just seems to be, I don't know, that just seems to be the way that's supposed to be. So.
And I think what we're talking about gets back to a fundamental question that you ask, whether it be a school, a business, or a nonprofit. Who are you serving? Who are your customers? Right? and you have different ones. Are individual lodges and Masons, individual Masons, customers of the Grand Lodge? Absolutely. But
Then
you
what's
have
our product?
right. Well, we've kind of settled on, what that product could be,
Right.
right? Better men who develop each other and who are able to have that betterness spill over into other parts of their life, with meaningful connections.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because now
Yeah.
I think now I get 10 cents. I think it's how that works. Is I get every time you say that, I get 10 cents, or yeah, so something along those lines.
And it's their work that they have to do in order to, one, bring their brothers along for the ride.
Oh yeah.
Because that's part of, entering into community. But then two, it's their work to figure out what that means and how that manifests. And for some, it means that I want to be a part of every organization, and I want to have leadership responsibilities. I want to have every title imaginable. We can debate whether or not that's a good metric for assessing the quality of a man. But largely, we do not have a mandate on this is this is how you are to believe, this is how you are to act, and this is what will happen if you don't. And I was trying to stay away from it.
I know.
But we're getting to it.
I may as well.
And when you insert sectarian religious dogma and chip away at Masonry's ecumenicalism and insert white Christian nationalism identity politics into Freemasonry, you wrestle that power away from the individual brother to define their own journey.
When you think about our degrees, right, you think about the working tools of them. In Ohio, I always think of the working tools of the entered apprentice being, very rough tools, very ones much more about like reflection, about self-reflection and priorities, and
Divestment.
yeah. And I think of the working tools of the fellowcraft as being precision tools that require industry and education and an investment of self to really utilize.
They're tools of minute refinement.
Right. And when you think of the working tools of the Master Mason,
I know where
what those really are about in many ways are, a perfect ashlar on a shelf is nothing more than a pretty rock. But if you take your perfect ashlar and with somebody else's, you build something that is steadfast and transcends things like time, distance, and death. So really, if you look at our degrees, the lessons of them are that you're supposed to develop your gifts to the best of your ability and then use them in the service of others.
Entered apprentice. You are divesting and you're making big changes.
Yeah.
Fellowcraft, you've made a lot of those big changes. Now it's time for like little course corrections and refinement. Master Mason is refinement in community with others.
Right. Because it can't be solely internal.
Correct.
But what is beautiful about that is what you said, is that you're with other people who are on the same journey. And my journey isn't the same as yours, right? I got to where I am not necessarily by reading all the books that are on your bookshelf. Maybe I got to it by sitting out in nature and really contemplating, or reading, the work of Aldo Leopold and really thinking about, the land ethic and the work ethic. But where we started from was this idea of why, or even necessarily like how. And what you're talking about in terms of like putting in that kind of like nationalist or, whatever politics into that, you take away the brother's ability to, he can ask how or why, but you close the gate on that journey to him. Right? Well, why do we do this? This is why. What about this? No, we can't do that because whatever. And that seems to do Masonry a disservice, I would think.
Talking about our individual journeys, Chad, you and I are on a similar journey with different inputs and outputs. And I'm thinking of this like an AI model. We have different inputs and we have different decision tree logic that's happening. And then we can have different outcomes. And the big difference between Freemasonry and a sectarian, influenced Freemasonry is in an ecumenical Freemasonry, it's okay to have different outcomes. It's okay. You're not going to arrive at the same conclusions I do, and that's okay. And it's better than okay. I can look at your outcomes and I can learn.
Right.
And I can better myself through that exploration.
Right. You and I can read the same text.
Yep.
And we can look at it from what we bring to the table, right?
Yep.
We come away with similar ideas, but it is going to be informed by who we are, where we come from, and that kind of thing. And then by talking about it, all of a sudden, my understanding of it grows. My connection to it grows. My connection to you grows. And yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. And I don't know, I'm going to go on my soapbox here. I think what frustrates me is that we get so many brethren who are asking why or how on anything. Pick it. How the world works to why do we square our corners? And they're being told either not to ask, or they're being said, "Cause
it's tradition. It's how we've always done
I said
it."
So."
Yep.
How do we get other brethren there? How do we get them to not just say how or why, but then to actually, if the gate's being held closed, how do we get them to bust through that gate? I don't know. I don't know how we do that.
Couple thoughts.
Okay.
One, how do people come to Freemasonry? Of their own free will and accord, right?
Right.
You embark on, a journey of spiritual discovery because you choose to embark on it. It doesn't just like, wham, one day, slap you in the head. So it is a conscious choice. And so in that regard, we can't force anyone to embark on spiritual self-improvement. Largely, again, tying it back to sectarian religion tries to force, that journey along a certain path. And so,
and a certain time frame.
Yes. And so, what we can do is empower brethren to take that journey. And how we do that is we create a safe place in Masonry to learn from others, espouse different points of view without judgment, and double down on the ecumenical nature of a brotherhood of men under the fatherhood of God, no other questions or clarification necessary. And so if you put brethren in a place where they can employ the liberal arts and sciences, specifically rhetoric and logic, and not focus so hard on protecting and shielding your own point of view, but opening yourself up and being vulnerable to hearing other people's points of view that are divergent from yours and their philosophies and lifestyles that are different from yours. And you kind of take that in and mull that over. Your mind may very well not be changed, but you will have a better connection. You will have a more meaningful connection with that person. you build that meaningful connection and increase that connection, but then you also are both better for it because you're practicing empathy, and you're learning a little bit more about how someone else views their relationship with the divine.
And it gets you out of that little box, or it makes it just a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
But that
But
is
that's
scary.
It's hard to do. And I'm not like holding myself up as a beacon of like, look
Mm.
what I accomplished. No. This is terrifying.
Even just learning to listen, to hear, and not to respond or not to defend. I love that you
Yes.
said that.
Listen to understand.
Yeah.
When you listen to understand, you drop the pretenses and enables you to absorb the information.
Right. And social media isn't really designed for that. It's designed for, but what that takes in a lodge is, that takes work to set up. It takes work to maintain. It takes work to be able to say, God, I just don't, I just don't, I see where you're coming from. I just don't agree respectfully. Or maybe that's not even the right word to say.
That's okay.
Like I see where you're coming from, but yeah, it just doesn't speak to me. I don't know.
Well, is there anything about it that does? You don't need to take the whole thing. But if there's a little piece here and here and here, you say, ooh, those are good nuggets. I'm going to file those away.
That is really hard to do in today's society, whether it's politics or religion or even just being a human being.
But isn't that the work of Masonry? And isn't that the value of Masonry? Doing what is hard to bring about a better, more nuanced and understanding relationship between a given brother in the lodge and the God that made the heavens and the earth and all things.
Yeah.
I can't carry your burden for you, but I can carry you.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, paraphrased badly. Our
Telling
job
you.
isn't to do the growing for our brothers, but our job is to empower them to grow.
Yeah.